Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Why Every Business Needs a Pen Test, Ethical Hacking for Stronger Cybersecurity, presented by CEO at TCM Security, Heath Adams. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting and moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use that chat or the Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today, so without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Heath.
Thank you, Mariella. Hello, everybody. My name is Heath Adams, and today we're going to talk about pen testing. And just a really quick overview of who I am. Again, CEO of TCM Security, was a accountant turned into what I call a security geek, and really just in love with all things hacking and ethical hacking. And so for our standpoint, we do a lot of pen testing from the TCM security side. We do a lot of risk assessment, security audits, all that fun stuff. And I've got some links here for social media, websites, all that fun stuff. But we've got a really packed schedule here for 30 minutes. So I'm going to kind of just zoom through here. So briefly, we're going to talk about what a pen test is. We're going to talk about some of the types of pen testing, and then I'm going to cover some actual methodology. We'll walk through a real pen test results and just kind of see the value that it provides here. But the very short of what a penetration test is, hey, companies pay us to find vulnerabilities before bad people do. So we're going in and we're looking for vulnerabilities that could be in networks, that could be web applications, could be physical, and we'll talk about what that looks like here in just a second. So who needs a penetration test? Pretty much every single organization. I'm not going to go line by line here, but there's a good chance if you're watching, your organization falls into this. But from our standpoint, hey, business handling any sort of sensitive data, compliance requirements like PCI DSS requires penetration testing. Any sort of company developing applications, especially if they're web apps or if they're mobile apps, any sort of government agencies, startups, especially, basically anybody putting any sort of device or application out into an internet-facing system, and sometimes even not on internet-facing systems. So why get a penetration test? A lot of reasons for that. But again, main reason, hey, we want to identify vulnerabilities before bad people do. There may be compliance purposes, like we mentioned, PCI DSS, again, being a big one. We want to reduce the risk and potential financial loss. That's another big one. The average breach is upwards of $4 million, if not more than $4 million now in cost for an organization. A pen test costs a significant fraction of that. And so being able to get a pen test, find your vulnerabilities and go through that is way better than having to go through a breach. You get to validate your security configurations. You get to improve your overall security posture, which is the end goal here. So let's talk about the common types of pen tests that we have. So we've got, and this is not in any particular order here, but external is probably the most common. And so when we say an external penetration test, which I'm going to walk you through an example of one of those here in just a second. An external penetration test is on the outside looking in. So we are tasked with trying to break into a network, and that is from anywhere in the world, right? It doesn't have to be on premise or in the network. That is just, hey, from my house, can I hack into your organization? And a lot of that is looking at what we call open source intelligence, which we're going to talk about, and just looking at the information that's out there and what we can find about an organization to utilize that to then break in. We also have what are called internal. So these are all what we call network pen tests here at the top line. But an internal pen test is assuming some sort of breach. So somehow we got into your network. It could be through social engineering and somebody clicked a link and we got in. It could be that we are on site and maliciously left a device. In reality, when we're doing a pen test, we just send over a laptop or another device that we connect to, and then we perform the test that way. But a lot of the pen tests that we do, especially on the internal side, are against Active Directory. And you'll hear me talk about Active Directory here in a little bit. But from our standpoint, Active Directory is used at most organizations. It's somewhere around 95% or greater. The Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 are using it. Most medium to large businesses are using Active Directory in their environments. And the fun thing about Active Directory is that it ships vulnerable, and it's a feature, not a bug, but there's a lot of just vulnerabilities if you were to set up Active Directory on its own, just right out of the box. If you don't know anything about the security risks of it, then there's likely that there are vulnerabilities sitting there because Active Directory is inherently vulnerable by its own. And then we have wireless as well. So wireless is just another form of network pen testing, but we have a wireless network of any kind. We're looking at that and we're testing that. So that means looking at your regular networks and looking at your enterprise networks, even looking at guest networks, right? Are guest networks segmented properly? Can somebody access the internal network from a guest network? Can somebody get your password? All passwords that are pre-shared key, meaning that, or I should say, all wireless devices that are just pre-shared key, so like your home device, right? If you're watching and you're using like a phone number for your home device password or something very simple, all of those we can pull down the hash for those. Does not take much at all. Anybody with a basic $30 wireless adapter can pull down a hash. And if your password's weak enough, especially if it's a phone number, right, we can get that pretty easily. And so looking at security, looking at password strength, making sure enterprises are using enterprise features of wireless, making sure things are segmented, all very important. Our second most common type of pen test is web applications. There are more applications these days online than there are networks. And so when we talk about applications, we talk about typically about websites, right? So some sort of website where you typically have a login. You could think of Facebook as an example, right? If you're tasked to pen test Facebook, you're looking at the website and what you can do and what you can do maliciously and maybe even against business logic. So if I'm looking at a checkout cart and I have a $50 product in my cart, can I make that free? Can I do things that the program was not intended to do? Can we access the system behind the scenes? What can we do with the application? Can we take advantage of other users? Can we potentially elevate our privileges to an admin user? There's a lot of different things that we can do in web applications, and given the sheer amount of applications that are out there, it's a very common type of pen testing just because a lot of companies have their own applications. And unfortunately, a lot of developers are not taught secure coding practices in universities or even on the job. So for us, we go in there, we find the vulnerabilities, or we do code review as well and make sure that we look at the code, things are secure, and help the organizations patch their vulnerabilities again before bad people do. Same thing there with mobile. Mobile applications are very common nowadays, and they're littered with vulnerabilities as well. So we take a look at those. Cloud's another one. Everything is shifting to the cloud with Azure, Entra. We got AWS, we got GCP, Oracle. There's a ton of different cloud options there, and making sure things are secure because there are just easy ways to misconfigure cloud. Even security principles like going back to the external pen test, there's easy ways to say, like, I've got multi-factor authentication set up, but you may have it set up, but is it bypassable? There's several different ways, at least 7 that I can think of, that you can bypass multi-factor because maybe something else is enabled or a switch was flipped somewhere that shouldn't be. And there's just a lot of things like that. Same thing with the cloud. It's very easy to flip a switch or have something enabled by default, and then you have a vulnerability sitting there that you just don't know about. And so we're able to go in and find those. The last one that I have on here is physicals, which are fun. From our standpoint, this is like legal breaking and entering, right? So companies hire us to go and test the physical security of the buildings that they're working with. And so usually we're tasked with that for a specific purpose. So it's, hey, can you prove that you can get in and get to the server room? One that we did not that long ago was, hey, can you get into the server room, pick the lock on the server rack, and prove that you can access the server, because they needed to have proof that we could do that in order to actually encrypt their servers, because at the time their servers were not encrypted. And so they wanted to prove to the management that, yes, somebody can break into this building, get into the server room, and actually access the servers. And we were able to do that. So you're looking at the physical security, not just locks, doors, all that stuff, but also the people, social engineering, tailgating your way in, and just making sure that things are secure from a physical standpoint. So Pen testing goes beyond just the on the internet. It does go physical as well. And there's all kinds of different pen tests that are out there beyond just what I'm saying here. IoT devices are very common these days. Pen testing those is very important. It's just a growing area of concern as well. I've seen car hacking that's getting important, especially as cars become more digital and online. There's airplane hacking, so there's all different kinds of unique fields as well. Even voting devices, right? We were approached during election season for helping one of the states with voting devices, and so there's all kinds of things. There's something that could potentially be hacked. We're interested in hacking it. Is usually how that works. So moving on from there, I kind of want to get into some of the strategies that we use, and this is going to build up into how we hack organizations from an external perspective today, and then we're going to look at a case study from that. So we're going to start by defining OSINT, which is open source intelligence, and so that is anything that is publicly available out there. If you're in the U.S., our data is out there quite a bit. You can usually Google somebody and see where they live. If you've ever been involved in a breach, there's a chance that your passwords are out there, your emails, your address, all kinds of stuff, and we'll look at that as well. But OSINT is just open source intelligence. We're looking at publicly available information to be able to then utilize that somehow to get into an organization and capitalize on the information that's out there. Okay, so let's talk about an external pen test and what our attack strategy is. So external pen tests, I like to think about like home security. Uh, you're usually focused more on preventing your house from being broken into on the outside than you are on the inside, right? From home security standpoint, you're probably got locks on your doors. You may have cameras. You may have dogs. You may have motion lights, things like that, right? You're trying to deter somebody from breaking into your house. And the goal is always make your house less attractive than your neighbors. And it's kind of the same thing with externals. Where I think a lot of companies go wrong, and I say this to say before, let me back up here. Internal pen testing, right, is similar to an internal house where you may not even have locks on your doors because, hey, if somebody's already in the house, we've got bigger problems, right? But you may have defenses inside as well. Same thing with internal, but a lot of internal goes unnoticed, right? So, and I say this to say, when you're doing an external pen test or you're doing external security, a lot of times companies are doing vulnerability scans and they're saying, we're good. You're more likely to find a critical vulnerability on a vulnerability scan on an internal network than you are an external network. And the reason for that too is because you're really getting pen tested kind of all the time. I don't want to say pen tested, but there are bots scanning the internet 24/7. Your IP address is always getting scanned. If you throw a server online, you make a login panel for it, just give it a day and you'll have 500 plus attempts on that server for somebody trying to log into it. It does not take very long for a bot to find and try to identify and exploit very easily. So if there is a glaring vulnerability that is, so bad on the outside, somebody's going to find it before even a pen tester goes and looks at it. So you're not really looking at like, hey, I've got a vulnerability. Now, 0 days are different. 0 days happen quite frequently, and yes, that's something that pops up where that vulnerability is previously unknown to anybody, and then it just pops up, and everybody's in a mad dash to fix it. But we're not talking that right here. We're talking about, hey, just vulnerabilities that are known. If you're just running a vulnerability scanner, that's just kind of like checking the box. From our standpoint, what we're actually looking at is more of that open source intelligence. How can we get into the organization? We can look for misconfigurations. We can dive into applications. I want to know what your email format is. I want to know who works at your company. I want to know who's been involved in a breach. I'm going to guess passwords, and we're going to go through all that here in a second. I may look for login panels and try default passwords. I may look for open GitHub repositories that maybe were leaked by developers. I may look for open AWS buckets, things like that. I have Googled and found things where IT professionals were posting about their company, thinking discreetly about their company online on boards and stuff and giving away critical information. And so there's a lot of things that we can find by just doing searches online and finding and gathering intelligence about a company. And the more information that I can gather about a company, the better off I'm going to be as an attacker. So we're really looking at that. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to use Tesla as an example before we get into the real company here. From our standpoint, Tesla is just a big organization. Tesla's also involved in what's called a bug bounty program, meaning that everything I'm showing you here is fair game. Bug bounty programs, basically companies will pay you to find vulnerabilities before somebody else does, and they pay you a reward depending on how critical the vulnerability is. So Tesla is pretty much in a wide open scope. If you find a vulnerability, you can submit it to them and potentially get a payout. So one thing that I do when I am going against an organization is I first want to know what their naming format is for their email. So I can use a tool like this and just go in and say tesla.com. I can get results for known emails, and then I can also get most common results. So Tesla as a company has grown, and this is pretty common. We had similar for our company. We first started out, you could see Elon at tesla.com. Same with me. My email is my first name at tcm-sec.com, right? But as you grew as a company, then hey, you move from maybe first initial, last name. And that's the most common email pattern that they have. However, they also have a first three letters and then their last name as an email format as well. So I'm gathering this to then say, okay, if I know who works at your organization, then I likely can guess their email. And then all I have to do is go to LinkedIn and look at who works at Tesla. And then there's tools there that I can use to pull down that data pretty easily. But for example, any of these people that are here, I can guess that it's either first initial last name or first three letters last name, maybe first name. And then we can go through and there's actually email verifiers and all different types of things that we can utilize to then say, okay, is this a valid email address? And we'll take a look at that as well. But one of our best tools that we can use are data breaches. Data breaches happen all the time and they disclose all kinds of information about us. Again, we've all been involved in a breach at this point. It's more likely than not. And so there's information about your name, your address, IP address, phone number. I've seen VINs for vehicles. Passwords are a very big one, as you're about to see. Password hashes, all kinds of stuff can be used. And when we go through what I'm about to show you, it's almost like connecting the dots. If you've ever seen the picture of like the crime scene and they start in the middle and then they use the red string and they go from different dot to different dot until it all ties together. That's kind of what it's going to look like here. But I may come in, I may search a breach database and just see, okay, for anybody at tesla.com, who's been involved in a breach? So I'm going to start with the company first. And we're just going to take this first result here of this DAR Murray at tesla.com. So this person's been involved in a breach. What we don't know, we know first three letters and then the last name, we don't know much else, right? So if we come through here and we look at this result for DAR Murray, click into that, we could see name and email. So we don't get a name, it's just the email. Username is pretty just jumbled. We get a hash password, so we don't have a password here. We don't actually get a real address either, but we do get an IP address. So what I can do is a couple different things. I can first try, and I will try to search on that email address. So if we go back and we try to search on that email address right here, you can see that we only get one result. So that's not going to work. However, there was more information in that record, right? We have this IP address. Now, the IP address is just a snapshot in time. It doesn't mean that that is their current IP address because that changes. It does not mean that they're still living at that IP address either. But there could have been other compromises at that IP address that involve the same user. So if we go and we search that IP address instead, we could see the same result for the DR Murray. That was one that we already knew. And then if we come down, we get Eddie and Beatrice and Eddie, and that doesn't sound like our DR Murray, but we do get this DVM Murray 100 at gmail.com. And as a pen tester, on the ethical side, right, I'm not going to be attacking this person's personal accounts, but I may use that information to gather intelligence against them to then go attack them on their work account. And I can then go and say, okay, let me click into that record. Well, now I've got a name. I've got Darlene Murray. I've got a new email address that we can search on. I've got a username that I can search on. I do have the same, looks like same hash password, maybe different. I definitely have the same address. And then I've got the same IP address. So this IP address is going to do me no good, but now I've got some other information that I can go search on. Let's try searching on this DVM Murray 100 at Gmail. So we have the one record right here that we already knew about, but we also pull up a new record. So there's two records now. Okay, this record, this time, same data, right? Darlene Murray, which we can search on again. That is kind of, it's not common name, but it feels common enough that I may have to sift through results. However, I get a phone number this time, and I do get another hash password, which I can take these hashes and try to crack them and utilize that as well. But here I get a phone number. I could take that phone number and go search that. And then I get more emails. So I get the DVM Murray 100. I get the project DVM 08. I get the Darlene Murray 30 at Hotmail. And so now I'm just getting all kinds of information. And the more I get, the more I can dig and search, right? So let's take one of those new emails. And now we've got this one. And I can go through here and I have a whole bunch of password results now. So there are 12 results that came back. I've got a bunch of passwords from originally when we just started here. We just started with one record, right? And there was no passwords, just a hash password. Now I'm finding clear text passwords for this individual that I can then go and try to utilize against them individually. So that leads me into the next concept of attack, which is this attack called credential stuffing. So credential stuffing is when we take known account data, so known username and password, and we take that and try to utilize that against login panels. So a good example is like an email login. I may take known passwords to a known account and try to log in with them. This has been a very common type of attack. We've seen it. I think a really good news article that came out. I'd say it's a couple years now, but there were baby monitors that got hacked, and people were freaking out because they thought, oh, this baby monitor has a vulnerability. In reality, what they found out was no, mom is using the same password for all of her accounts. And so if you're reusing passwords everywhere, which most people do, then we have this kind of situation that pops up where okay, if you find a password in one location, try it somewhere else, and it's going to work. And so that's the concept and idea of credential stuffing. The larger an organization, the easier it is for us because we just have to take, I don't know, it's easier to try to guess 1,000 people's password than it is to try to guess 10. It's just a chance of probability and odds, which leads me into the next concept as well, which is called password spraying. That is where instead of using a known password, we just take the known email accounts that we identified and we try to utilize guessable passwords. Password 123 is being used in this example, but in reality, winter 2025 exclamation right now is going to hit somewhere. And we break in all the time just by guessing passwords. It's not very difficult. And again, we just spray. We have techniques that we can use that we call low and slow, where we're coming from different IP addresses every single time. We're doing very low thresholds, and we're not trying to lock out accounts or do anything. And it's very, very difficult to actually detect. So a motivated attacker, right? Somebody just scanning the internet, not really that motivated. They're looking for quick wins. But a motivated attacker, somebody that's chasing an organization for a specific reason, can do the same thing that we're doing, and they have unlimited time. Pentest, time engagement, right? But unlimited time and the ability to do this research and be able to guess passwords, it makes it a very dangerous situation. Same thing here. So I'm going to use attacking Outlook web app as an example, because a lot of companies are using Office 365. Some companies are using what's called OWA here, but just as an example of attacking a login panel, we get a couple of fun things out of this. OWA is pretty famous for, hey, we're here, we're trying to do a username that we're guessing, and then we're guessing a password, summer 2018 exclamation, right? What's nice about this is there's a time delay in OWA. And so if it responds fast enough, you see 0.22 seconds here, it knows that the username is valid even though we didn't get the correct password. So I know if I'm sending a list through that I'm now validating all the users that work at your organization. On top of that, it does give me information about host name. It gives me information even about the domain when I have failed logins. You can see it here on a successful as well. I've just got it blurred out. But you could see somebody getting compromised here with the same known credentials of summer 2018 exclamation, and then a successful login. And we utilize all kinds of stuff like winter, year, that's fine. Month, year, that's fine. We'll look at specific locations and areas. I mean, we really do our research into what could be a potential password. Sports teams are big. Uh, Again, political landscape. We have cracked a lot of passwords and guessed a lot of passwords around the election the last year, and so there's quite a bit that we can do, and just using a little bit of logic with known information that's out there, we can get in. All right, let's move on to the scary stuff, which is example. I've got looks like 5 minutes, but I do want to stay and take time for questions as well. So this is a real case example. This is a pen test we did a couple of years ago. Didn't want to use anything too recent, but this is passed long enough now that we can share the intel. Here we have a target that was a medium-sized city. So all employees, everything was in scope. Didn't matter the department, right? So anything within the city scope is in scope. The only thing that we could not do was social engineering, which it depends, right? Like social engineering, from my standpoint, should be in scope if you can do that. From our standpoint, a hacker's not going to say, "Oh, there's no scope." A bad person's not going to say, "Oh, there's I gotta stay in line with scope here." No, they're going to do whatever they can, including social engineering, to try to get in. So from our standpoint, though, we weren't allowed to social engineer, which makes it a little bit more difficult for the pen tester. When we have a week here to look at this again, time limited engagement. So we did what you saw an example of. We found username, we guessed password, we logged into an inbox. Okay. I blurred mostly everything here. The person that we ended up compromising, let's talk about two things. One, we got in, there was no multi-factor authentication. This wasn't even a bypass, this wasn't anything, but there was just no multi-factor authentication. So just guess password, logged right into inbox. You could see in the inbox that we have, hey, external September K9 training, right? Who did we compromise here? We compromised the second in command at the police department for this city. Okay, and so then we asked, hey, okay, so we got this account, but can we transition here to get inside the network? External access is one thing, internal access is another. So is there a VPN? Yeah, we found a VPN. We were able to get connected to the VPN, and then we were able to log into devices on the network. That's fun. What else can we find? This is where it kind of gets scary. So we found police reports. So we're able to go in and see who is getting arrested, who is the officer involved, all that fun stuff. So a lot of confidential information that probably shouldn't be public. This one is another one, like Crime Stoppers reports. So people that are giving out tips for things that are happening. So like tips are stated the suspect is named blank. They gave a description of the suspect. They stated they're the bartender at this place where the tipster, also works. So even though they're not giving the tipster information, like they don't put a name on here, they give enough information out that if somebody were able to find this and see this, they'll know, hey, who told on me to police, right? That could go really bad. Extending on that, we got CI reports. So these are your confidential informants. Who is purchasing drugs from who? Who are the informants? Where are they at? What date? What time? Everything. This is terrible for a police department if this leaks. This is really like life and death, right? If somebody finds out that somebody's a CI, that could end terribly. And we have all that information accessible to us. There's a lot more here. There's department staff info. We were able to find what were the beats, what shifts were people working, what time, what cars were they in, where are they going to be? Who are the informants? Who are the undercovers? Names, all that fun stuff. There's so much information here that we were able to keep out of the bad guys' hands. And this is one of those situations where we were doing more than just providing security. This literally could be life and death. And so when you talk about what the value is provided here, there's a lot, right? Risk identification for the vulnerabilities that are here, public safety protection, compliance, of course, security prioritization, of course, but just making sure that there were things that they had to take away from where they could go fix. And that was something that immediately, like we told them, we were communicating immediately. They went and fixed it before the pen test was even over, which is something that we are really big on, is communication, making sure that we're talking to our clients. We're not just delivering a report and saying, have a nice day. There should be no surprises by the time the report happens. We're working hand in hand every single day to make sure that you know exactly what's going on in case you need to fix it in real time. So that leads me to really my last slide here. First of all, thank you for attending. Second, we are offering what is called a free Active Directory health check. The health check is completely free. It's for qualified organizations, which you just got to submit a form online. We basically have you run some software. You'll get a report back, and we'll go over a debrief with you on that report. There's no obligations or anything, but there's a ton of value there. If you've never had any sort of pen test, even if you have had a pen test internally, if you're using Active Directory at all, there's a lot of value for this here. So it's something that we're not going to try to upsell you on. We're not going to try to sell you anything. You can take the report and walk away. But it is something that, if you're interested, we're happy to do it for you. And there's a link down here, which I'm also just going to post into the chat. Actually, I've already been beat to it. So there's a link there in the chat that just got dropped. And then that takes you to this page here where you just have this schedule your free consultation. All you got to do is drop in your name, company name, email, and then one of our team members will be reaching out to you. Outside of that, that is all I had. So I'm going to open up the floor for any questions we may have.
Absolutely, Heath. I will go ahead and give our audience a quick minute to throw any last minute questions in, but I just wanted to remind our audience that if they miss out on any part of this session, we will absolutely be sharing a recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. And I dropped that link, so we are all good to go. We have one question here that came in at the top. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that businesses have about penetration testing?
That's a good question. We've got a few offhand that I can think of. Not all pen testing is the same, right? So one of the things for us is that we see a lot of pen tests or a lot of things being called pen tests that are really vulnerability scans, or a lot of companies thinking, well, I've got vulnerability scanning done, I'm okay. You can see that the vulnerability scan is not going to go do the digging that an individual is going to do, and there's no automated platform that's going to go do the digging that we're doing either. And so, there's concepts now of like automated pen testing and just like buzzwords around it where the technology's not there yet. The other thing that I'd point out too is a lot of organizations maybe see the pen tester as their enemy. Like we provide a report and it's I would say like a company may be like, oh, trying to handcuff or even like I guess make sure that we're not finding or seeing certain things to look better on the report. But at the end of the day, we're here to help. We're your ally, your friend. We're trying to make sure that we're finding this before somebody else does. And so, being able to work hand in hand with a pen tester, we're not here to make anybody look bad. We're not here to get anybody in trouble. And what we find too, even like when we're doing phishing assessments or social engineering, the people that end up clicking on the link or submitting their password to us, for us, they usually become your biggest advocates of, hey, I didn't think I'd fall for it. I fell for it. And they then go and educate others. So just because something is insecure and maybe the person designed it doesn't mean that, it's their fault. Or same thing with the social engineering. We're all human. We make mistakes, and we're here to educate and make sure that we can do that before somebody bad comes in and takes advantage of that.
Absolutely. No, it's definitely a journey we take together 100%. We have a couple questions coming in. Thank you all so much for hanging back for a couple minutes to get through some of these questions. We had one here that asks, what is one simple security measure a company can implement today to improve its security posture?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of a toss up. I mean, password policy is the thing that's going to get you the most. If you have a 8-character policy, it's going to be a lot easier for us to guess. Passwords are still, I mean, even if we compromise one like you saw, or we phish one, then we have problems. Doesn't matter how good your security is on the password side. But password security is one that organizations can work towards and get. For TCM, for example, we typically recommend 14. We utilize 14-character passwords. Doesn't mean that doesn't make it guessable still. There's a lot of rules and things around passwords. And I think our longest password we've actually cracked is 26 characters. So there's some things there. But if you improve your password policy, that's one. And then multi-factor authentication is another. Again, you really just want to make your company from an outsider perspective. You want to make it more difficult than your neighbor. Same thing with the house reference, but you add multi-factor, you add good password policies, good hygiene, good practices. That makes you less attractive than somebody else that's going to be an easy win, because that's what a lot of these organizations or a lot of hackers are going and looking for easy wins. Again, if you're a specific organization or industry that maybe is more targeted, or you got somebody looking at you, makes it more complex. But passwords and MFA are where I'd start for sure.
Good starting points, 100%. Alrighty, we have 2 more questions. So if we can hang back for about 5 more minutes, I think we should be awesome. How is it that live passwords are readily available? Great question.
Yeah, good question. So every time that there is a data breach, that data, I shouldn't say every time, most times when there's a data breach, that breach typically ends up on the dark web first. There are aggregators of this data that are out there. So there's websites and databases that then take the passwords found and the usernames found on the dark web and then put them into a database that we then can go search and access. So the same information that I'm going and finding is readily available for not that much money to go for anybody to search and find. So we're basically just using aggregators to be able to do this.
So scary that everything just ends up on the dark web nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, and then final question, and then I will skedaddle everyone out of here. Is there any industry more vulnerable, or are you seeing any industries becoming more compromised, like healthcare, finance, government? I know you mentioned the police department, so I think that's
Yeah.
a fantastic example.
Yeah, there's a lot. From, I don't think any industry is safe. From a risky industry, healthcare is definitely one. We pen test a lot of hospitals and healthcare organizations, and it's really, hey, they either have money or they don't, and when they don't, it can be really bad. Um, from another standpoint, education is a big one, especially K through 12. There's not a lot of money and funding there. So you've got usually a lot of students, a lot of devices, resources, and not a lot of people to handle that, which is difficult as well. Government, of course, government is just, I mean, they're always 10 to 20 years behind the times in terms of tech and some of the things they're using, and they have to use legacy software. Same with hospitals. There's equipment and machines that are using legacy software, legacy versions of Windows, that are inherently vulnerable. And so there's things in place where, hey, how do we fix this? Or when we can't, or we can't upgrade this and patch this, how do we make it secure? So you see a lot of industries like that. I would say those are probably big three: is healthcare, government, and education.
Anyone can be a target nowadays, so that is such good info to have moving forward. Thank you so much, Heath. And that will be our last question. So just want to remind our audience, if you missed out on any part of this session, we will absolutely be sharing this recording with you. And if you have any more questions, please do not be afraid to visit that link we dropped in the chat for more info on pen testing, or educate360.com. I believe that'll be it. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you all so much for hanging back, everyone. And thank you so much, Heath.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Alrighty. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and hopefully we'll see you all very soon. Bye now.